McAfee's Advanced Threat Defense, or ATD, is our sandboxing technology. In this video, I'm going to show our users how to create a custom image that they can then upload for malware analysis. To do this, we're going to start with a VMware workstation. This is where we'll build our image, and I'll start in two separate parts. The first part is what are the default settings. Here, I'm just going to browse to an ISO file. In my case, Windows XP. I'll copy and paste a Windows product key in here, leave the full name as administrator, and password will be cracker42 as seen below. On the next screen here, it's going to ask us what our virtual machine name will be. You'll have a chance to edit this later, but you can leave it as is, or the default in the recommended guide is virtual machine image. The RAM, we're going to set it as 1 GB. We're going to leave the rest of the defaults settings for VMware. Use an IDE controller. And then at this point we're going to change it to 5 GB as hard drive. We're going to allocate it now, and we're going to store it in a single file. Here's where I'm going to change the name. The product guide recommends using virtual machine image as your VMDK name, but if you'd like to be specific, say Windows XP, you can do that here as well. Creating the disk size can take anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, so just be aware that this is going to take longer than the time that it takes to watch this video. Also, here's some more of those warnings about creating a virtual machine in a virtual machine and how that might affect performance. You'll also see warnings about the VMware, downloading and installing the VMware tools onto the host machine. Well, if you're typically working in virtual machines, this is a great thing to do, and it can really simplify mouse actions and screen resolution and whatnot. But for our case, we don't want to install VMware tools. It messes with our ability to spin up snapshots during malware analysis. So as you see buttons come up for would you like to install VMware tools, always click cancel. We don't want that installed. It just complicates the VM image. You can go back and remove them later, but for the most part, let's just not install them at all and never have to deal with that. So kind of be on the lookout for those. They can pop up quickly, and sometimes I've even seen them auto install, which can add to your workload later. Now at this point, you're going to have some time to wait. So grab a cup of coffee, maybe have something to read, and there can be anywhere from 10, 15, even 20 minutes while the files get installed and your image is being created. I like to use some editing so we don't have to sit here and wait for these, and I don't have to think of things to talk about while we just wait for an approximately 33 minutes or whatever the case may be during installation. Now it doesn't like administrator here. We selected that back when we left the default name administrator and password as cracker. So we're going to switch that to root, and administration or organization we're going to just leave blank. Again, we'll zip through here. And as our virtual machine starts to come up, we will see one of those dialog boxes that'll say, would you like to install VMware tools? At this point, cancel out of that. Also, you may see some other warnings and balloons, like you don't have a firewall or AV in place. Go ahead and just exit out of all of those. That won't be really helpful for us at this time. In fact, firewalls and AV are kind of counterproductive to what we're trying to accomplish, which is create an environment where malware can run freely so that we can observe its behavior. Any default AV or firewall could prevent us from doing that. So we're going to go ahead and disable a lot of these things as we set up our virtual environment for malware analysis. And here we have them trying to get us to install VMware tools again, and we'll cancel out of that. And delete a lot of the dialog boxes or balloons that pop up. You'll see that there's an activation key in the system tray. We'll go back and address that in a little bit. So part 2 now is preparing the VM for malware analysis. I mentioned the part about turning off firewalls and AV, but we also have to install programs where we can launch different types of applications, such as PowerPoint, Word, Excel, Adobe, those types of programs. We'll want to install and get this machine ready to analyze all the different types of malware that it can support. So one of the first things we're going to do is go into our control panel and just go to our Windows firewall. And we'll turn off the firewall. Some of the things you'll notice when working in a VM is that the resolution doesn't always work great for seeing the top of a dialog box and the bottom. So you'll see me moving up and down quite a bit just to find the OK button or the accept, and then move back down to exit out of it. So now that the firewall is turned off, we're also going to disable automatic updates, since a lot of these updates would actually be counterproductive to running malware. So we'll have to go into the security panel. One of the things that's interesting to me is as I move back into XP, I don't work here a lot. Some of the control panel options, such as automatic updates, firewalls, they're in different locations than they have been in operating systems I've been working in more recently, such as Windows 8.1 or even Windows 7. There's a lot of changes. So sometimes it may just take some used to or finding these locations again if you haven't worked here for a while. Once we've disabled updates and turned off the firewall, we'd like to also install FTP, since the mode of transport from a file to get to a virtual machine or from our network through the Advanced Threat Defense onto a virtual machine is through FTP. We have to enable that service or download it if it doesn't exist already. So what we're going to do is actually enable Telnet, and then we'll go install the FTP as additional software. To install or at least start the Telnet process, we'll have to go into Services, and then you can see here that it's currently disabled, so we'll want to enable that. We'll want to enable it and also make it automatic on startup. You can see that the service, however, is still stopped. So what we'll want to do is hit apply, and then you'll see that at start will go from grayed out to clickable. Start it and click OK. From this point forward, our Telnet services should start every single time we launch a snapshot of this virtual machine. The next piece will be to install that FTP. FTP is an additional software package that comes on the install disk. So if it didn't get installed during startup, in which case we did not do this, we'll have to go back and do this later. So in order to do that, we'll have to go into our virtual machine settings and mount the ISO that we use to install Windows XP. So we're going to come in here to our settings, we're going to browse to our CD-ROM, and we're going to point it at this ISO image, the same one we used to create the VMDK file. Then once we do that, you should see that a dialog box will actually open in the virtual machine or install process that will allow us to do different types of install options. In our case, we're just going to exit out of it. We're going to go back to our control panel and add or remove additional programs, and then scroll down here until we find the IIS or Internet Information Services, and then a new dialog box will open. In there, select Common Files, FTP Services, and also select the IIS snap-in. Once you do that, select OK, and it'll install off the ISO that we just mounted to the D drive. Once that gets installed, we're going to need to then set up our home directory for our FTP. So we'll close out of this add remove Windows and Windows components, and we'll go ahead and we're going to edit the FTP services. So in order to do that, we just go to Administrative Tools here, and the Internet Information Services dialog box. Select the root from the directory on the left, FTP sites, and then the default FTP site, and go to Properties. Right click on that and then go to the Properties. That'll show us our home directory on this last tab here. We just want to make that the C drive. So I'll just browse to the C drive here, select OK, and then and we're going to enable write access. So we want our files to have full read-write access so that it can write to disk. If it's going to try and do that as it installs malware, we'll be able to give it that permission and observe its behavior to do so. Once that's done, select OK. We'll close out of here and move on towards our next step. The next step is we want to give the administrator the ability to log in without having to use a password every time, so that in the VM that VM's not waiting for a user password. So we're going to go in here and we're going to type in run DLL32 netplwiz.dll, and then also users run DLL, and just hit enter. When you do that, you'll see that this user accounts dialog box pops open, and we want to make sure that the top box is unchecked. To do that, we'll need to put in our password again. Here it is, cracker42, and then confirm that password. Now, for whatever reason, this doesn't always take, and so what we're going to do is we're going to set the settings here and go ahead and apply them. Select OK. You can see that we're unchecked at the box. Everything looks like it's good to go, but we're still going to double check that later on and log back out and log in to make sure that launches without any issues. Before I restart, however, I want to try and download a couple of utilities that also help us in our malware analysis. Now there's two ways to do this, and I'm going to show you both. My preferred way is actually to download all of these beforehand and place them in a shared folder that's available to these VMs that I'm creating. The other is to actually give your VM access to the internet, which mine has here, and go to the URLs that's given in the product document page and download each one individually. The reason I prefer to download them all to a shared folder location is that I'll set up multiple VMs. A Windows 7, a Windows XP, Windows 8, 64, 32-bit, Windows 2003, 2008. You'll set up a lot of these over time, and so it's just nice to have them all in one location. However, the first one, for the time being, we'll just go out to the internet, and the first one we're going to go to is on Microsoft TechNet. We're going to download a command line utility called SigCheck. What this does is it can give some information about different files being run in our environment. Things like file version, timestamp information, maybe even digital signature details that may include things like certificate chains and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this to a specific location, and that's going to be my Windows System 32 file location. Then once that's done, select Next, yes to all, and then go ahead and take me to that location when everything's done. Now I've got to find that system, which is the SigCheck that I just found, and run that from this location. Once that is done, then it's installed, and I can move on to the next utility that we'll be downloading. This utility is called Merge IDE, M-E-R-G-E-I-D-E. It appears to be a VirtualBox utility that is used in virtual environments. When Microsoft creates a new instance of an operating system, it often associates hardware to the operating system. So as you migrate virtual machines inside of different environments, it's not the same hardware, and sometimes you might run into licensing issues. This utility alleviates those issues. So we're going to install it so that when we migrate this to our own environment, we're not going to have a licensing issue. So you can download it here the same way that I used to, that I've done in the past or just showed you with SigCheck. But instead, I also mentioned that I like to have a folder or a shared folder on a network location where I can just browse to it, that I have all of my utilities. So I've got a share out here that I'm just going to browse to. And I've gone through, and since I've done this before, I've created all of these, and don't need to go to a web page every single time I download it. So here we have Merge IDE, and what I'll do is I'll just copy this into my virtual environment. Just copy and paste that or drag it over to the desktop. Get a quick security warning. And then what I do is extract it and run it. There's two things that you're going to run. One is just the utility itself. The other is just going to be a registry change. So that actually what's happening is when a machine fires up, there's a registry entry that tells it to verify that this is the same machine that it was installed on with a key in the registry. So we're going to change that key so that doesn't happen. So when we're all done here, we'll be able to take this VMDK file and move it on to our McAfee Advanced Threat Defense without having to worry about conversion issues. Now I'm going to install Microsoft Office. The version I chose is Office 2007, and I did that by going to the VM settings and mounting the ISO and just installing it that way. What I'm going to do now that it's been installed is decrease the security settings on Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And to do that, I come into the options and then the Trust Center, and here in Trust Center you can see that I enable all macros. As many as you know, macros can be a vulnerable option to allow it to run in your environment, and in most cases we don't allow macros to run at all, or at least at a higher security setting. So I'm going to change that on all three of the programs that I just installed. As a note, there's no need to install many of the other Office tools. Currently, the support for the McAfee Advanced Threat Defense is Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. So if you've got additional files like Publisher, there's no need to install those and waste the disk space. We don't analyze those files at this time. If that changes, we'll let you know in the documentation. In Excel, the Trust Center settings are slightly different. You don't have the same macros. So we're just going to go ahead and just say never show information about the block content, just let it run. And then finally move over to PowerPoint, and PowerPoint's going to be very similar to Word. And you just go to the options menu, go to the Trust Center, and enable the macros. Doing this will allow us to just run everything and hopefully even get pop-up screens. The McAfee Advanced Threat Defense has the ability to take screen captures of pop-up windows. So if there's a dialog box that opens because of malware being run, we'll grab that screen capture and put it in the report for you. So once that's done, we'll be able to get as much information about the malware as possible and have a nice environment for our Microsoft Office files to run. Also, as many of you may remember, between 2003 and 2007, Microsoft changed their file format from a DOC to DOCX, and they added that X to many of their file formats in 2007. What we're going to do is go to their file format converters. Now, this is, again, a utility that I've downloaded from the Microsoft web page, and I'm just going to install this. This allows us to be backwards compatible with .doc files, anything that doesn't have the .x at the end of it. So that way, no matter what type of Word file it is, both will be able to run and we'll be able to analyze either or. So this is another compatibility. This is the compatibility pack that many of you remember. I'm going to go ahead and just install this here as well. That way I've got full support both forward and backwards for Office and files. Staying here in my folder, let's see, I've got my Adobe Reader application. We're going to go ahead and install Adobe Reader so we can get PDF files installed as well. Now, there's not much to installing Adobe, as you know. Most of the time when we get a new computer, we have to go down and install that or install that from a location. I'm going to do that same thing here. There is one setting that we'll need to change to make this more compatible for our malware analysis, and that one thing is what we've done with the same thing as we've done for our OS, and that is to disable checking for updates. We don't want a new machine that's being spun up in a virtual environment to have to go out and check for updates, whether that's going to be Adobe or an Office or this firewall, security settings, whatever the case may be. So once this is installed, I'll create a shortcut on our desktop to go to. We'll go ahead and open it up so that we can change one default setting. As I do this, you'll notice that on my EULA screen that opens up, I'm having a hard time getting everything in the screen. If you remember, we did not install our VMware tools, which would adjust screen resolution. We didn't do this, nor do we want to, but we do have to go in and do this manually so that we can get everything into the same screen. So I'm just going to go in here to my settings, change the resolution, and now that we've done that, we can see the accept button on our EULA screen here. Now moving back to Reader, we want to go in and we want to hit Edit and then Preferences. We're looking for automatic updates, and that can be found in the Generals category on the Startup section. So when this application starts up, at the very bottom you can see that it's set to check for updates. We don't want this to happen. We don't want to waste time checking for updates when we spin up a new virtual machine, when we just want to analyze the malware. Once that's done, this application is ready to go. You don't have to open it again. So at this point, we've installed SigCheck, Merge IDE, Adobe, and Microsoft Office. And then we've gone in there and we've lowered their security settings, or we've disabled automatic updates so that we can just focus on the task at hand, which is analyzing malware. Now, we're going to go ahead and install Microsoft Visual C++. And there's 3 different packages, 2005, 2008, and 2010. This allows us to run any content that was written in C++ programming language, which helps expand the interactive and multimedia features and functions of the OS. So now we can get analysis on anything that accesses those libraries in that language. And then finally, once those are installed, and as you can see here, I just have them all saved in a folder as opposed to going out to the website, which is a perfectly viable option as well. But once those are installed, I have one more package from Microsoft that I need to install, which is the .NET Framework. Many of you recognize .NET Framework as something that we'll have to go and install after setting up a new machine. But the reason we're actually installing it is it's a language. It provides a platform for language interoperability between programming language. So it's a framework class library that Microsoft utilizes to help programmers develop for Windows platforms. We also know that malware can also use this and leverage it to create vulnerabilities that will want the ability to scan if one were to come into our environment. So we install that here as well. We also install Java. Java can be pretty useful in some situations, but as many people know, it's also a pretty vulnerable platform that attackers have used to get into systems, to get us to install fake updates, whatever the case may be. And we'll want to install that so we can analyze Java. Most Java instances come with something sort of freeware. In this case, it's McAfee Security Scan Plus, which is a free plug, completely unintentional on my part. Once Java is set up, we'll be able to analyze any Java files coming in. A lot of the enterprise products already have engines built in there for scanning Java files, but in case you don't have one of those products like the Web Gateway or the IPS, having Java on the client itself will help us to get malware analysis from Java-based exploits. Once that's installed, we're going to need to go into the settings for Java, and you'll notice that there's no icon on the desktop. We'll have to go into the control panel to do that, and then look for the Java icon, open it by double-clicking it, and then go to the Update tab. And here you can see that we've got Check for Updates automatically. Again, we're going to deselect this so that we're not checking for updates when we should be running code. Apply, OK, and that's all we have to do. Now, one thing to do before we move on is to check our startup menu or configuration. And we're just going to go into our run and type msconfig to get to our system configuration utility. And under the startup tab, we want to see what applications have been added to the startup to see what's going to run every time the machine spins up. And here we see Reader and Java have been added to this startup item, and we don't want that to happen. So we're going to uncheck those, and to apply those changes, we need to restart our computer. This will do two things. The first is that it'll change the configuration so that there aren't applications starting every time we restart the box. The second thing, if you go back and remember, we wanted to start up a machine and get to the desktop without login. But as you can see, we have to log in here. Our default password is cracker42, as we've seen multiple times, but we shouldn't have to do this. So there's going to be a couple things we want to check to make sure that we don't go through this again. If we don't get rid of that login screen, we won't be able to launch the VM to analyze malware. So I'll show you how to fix this in a little bit. In fact, we went over this, but I'll show you what changed in the meantime. But before we get to that, let me do a couple more things. The first thing I want to do is change some browser settings. We want to make sure that our browser settings are also set up so that they will be able to not block pop-ups. We want to see if malware is trying to get us to click in something that will take us to a malicious website. So we want to turn off our pop-up blocker on the default browser. If you'd like to use a different default browser, that's fine too. You can install Firefox or Chrome or whatever the case may be, but I've just stuck with the IE here. Another thing you want to do is when it opens up a new tab, just leave it blank. We don't need it going out there trying to download content from another website, so just leave that one blank. And then finally, on the Advanced tab, scroll down to Security and check the box to allow active control to run in your environment. So, or active content, I'm sorry, to run in your environment. Now I'm just going to check really quick for internet connectivity in here, make sure everything's working okay. And then once I've got that verified, I'm going to go and I'm going to grab an Adobe Flash Player. I haven't downloaded that yet or installed it, so I'm going to do that now. The ability to analyze flash files is something that we've recently added, and in order to do that, we have to install the Flash Player in our virtual environment. We recommend using whatever you're using on your hosts, but one of the things that we'll do, similar to all of the other malware or all the other software that we've done for malware installed for malware analysis, is that we've unchecked the box to select updates. So once you install it, it's going to be the default Flash Player going forward, unless you'd like to change your VMware settings at some future time. Select your version of Flash Player, in my case for XP, and then make sure you uncheck any optional offers. There's no need to make this virtual machine any larger than it has to be. Having large VMs limits the number of concurrent virtual machines that we can run. There's only so many resources on any bare metal box, so we want to utilize those as best as possible. And making these VM sizes as small as they need to be, without making them bloated, gives us more flexibility to analyze more samples simultaneously. Once I get through the install process here, then I check Finish, and you'll notice that right at the beginning of that process, I deselected the box to check for updates automatically. Make sure you see that as you're going through any install process and uncheck that if it's in the install process. If not, go into the Reader or the Java settings and deselect a box that's automatically checking for updates. You'll notice here down in the corner that we've still got activation keys that we haven't addressed yet. We've noticed those when we first started up our virtual machine. We put in a key during our install process, but we didn't actually activate yet. So now we'll just need to go activate this here. So we'll just double click on the keys, and it'll take us through the activation windows, and once we're connected and get connectivity, it'll register our copy of Windows. Now that that's been activated, we want to go back to our run window, and we want to type in the run DLL32, the net plwiz.dll, and the user run DLL, which brings us to our user account. You'll notice that the very top box there where users must enter a username and password to use this computer was deselected the first time we came in here, but we still had to put in our username and password. cracker42 and cracker42 to confirm that. And this time that box was checked, so for whatever reason that box became active again, and when we logged off and logged back in, we had to type in our password. So we're going to go in here and we're going to restart our computer. We're going to make sure that it just logs in automatically without the need for a password, so that when they start up in a virtual environment, it's not waiting for user input before it can analyze malware files or samples. Perfect. There's no username and password prompt, so our virtual machine should be good to go. So at this point, I'm going to shut down my virtual machine, and I'm going to browse to the file location of the VMDK file. This VMDK file is what we'll need to FTP or SFTP onto our Advanced Threat Defense box for malware analysis. So let me show you where that's located, and it's the default location for VMware Workstation is always in the C, then the users, and in my case it's administrator, my documents, and then virtual machines. This is the VM Workstation default location, and here's the VMDK file that we'll use for malware analysis.